So we're going to look at the front and the back of the packet to begin with. So on the front of the packet, you will find the designer. So there are a lot of very common designers: New Look, Simplicity, Vogue, and they'll become very familiar to you as you go across your sewing journey. There'll always be a set of codes that the pattern will have, and I'll explain how useful they are in a little while. And then you'll get some images. So it's very usual for patterns to have multiple variations or even multiple garments to construct. So in this instance here, there is a dress, a top and a skirt, all with different variations. So you know what you're getting. So that's kind of the first, the front of the pattern, and that's the visual. On the back of the pattern, it's a little bit more complicated, lots of numbers and charts. So again, you've got the code at the bottom. So this is actually a slightly different pattern, but this is the code. Now this number here will be printed onto every single pattern piece. So if you're anything like me and you have multiple patterns on the go at any one time, you know that you can match the pattern pieces up to this code and you can pop them all back in their packets safely. A lot of sewing patterns will come in 2 sizes or even 3 sizes, so the smaller size will be maybe pattern version A, middle sizes might be B, larger sizes might be C. So it's a really good idea just to have a little look to see what sizes this particular pattern is corresponding to, because I've had many students buy a pattern thinking it's going to fit them, and it's either been too small or too big. So we'll move on to the columns now. So in this instance, actually, you got it in 2 languages. This is in English and this one's in French, and it's the same information, just one's in a different language. So let's start at the top. So every garment, every pattern starts off as a 2-dimensional blueprint. They're called blocks in the sewing industry, and every size will have a block. So there'll be a whole variety of different blocks that the designer will make too. And what this section does here is outline the different points on your body and what size that corresponds with. So in this instance, this pattern goes from size 8 to size 18, and it looks at the bust, the waist, the hip, and your neck to waist measurements. They're just those 4 measurements, and we'll go into a lot more detail about that in a second. But it's really useful to measure yourself so you can compare yourself against the industry block. So once you've established a size, for example, we're going to cut to a size 16. What you'll have underneath are the variations of the garment, okay, and it will tell you how much fabric you will need to purchase in order to make that garment in that size. So this bit of chart is very useful. So fabric, if it's cut from a bolt, will either be 45 inches, which is about 110 centimetres, or 60 inches, which is about 145 centimetres. So the chart will outline how much fabric you need based on the width of fabric that you want to purchase. Now, one thing that is worth noting is that this doesn't take into consideration any pattern design or any nap that a fabric might have. So a nap is essentially when fibres come up from the surface of the fabric, like velvet, for example. But if you've got a pattern that's also directional, so it only goes in one direction, then that really also needs to be factored in. So you may need to consider buying a little bit of extra fabric if that's the fabric you've chosen to work with. Just underneath that, you will have the garment measurements. Now these are really important. So when patterns are designed, your measurements are taken up close to your body, and these 2D blocks or blueprints are formed. Blocks tend to be made with what's called wearing ease, and the idea is that there's a little bit of extra fabric that is put into the design of the blueprint to allow you to kind of move around a little bit. That said, there is another type of ease, and that's design ease. So I'm, for example, wearing a very oversized top. It's very deliberately oversized. So the wearing ease had been taken into consideration, and then they designed extra fabric so the aesthetic is slightly different. Now, when you're looking at a pattern, the garment measurements will be the measurements of the garment once it's been made up. And it's really useful to be able to take a tape measure and look at the measurements that it's given you, and sort of measure it around yourself to see whether actually, if I did cut to a size 16, this is what it's going to look like on my waist. Actually, I might want to come in a little bit. So this bit, these garment measurements will differ from these because this is your body and this is what the garment will look like on your body. So underneath the garment measurements, you tend to get information about suggested fabrics. So this is really, again, very, very useful. It will recommend the type of fabric which would look great with the garment that you have chosen. So it will take into consideration things like drape and weight of the fabric, which is very useful information to have when you're looking to purchase fabric for this particular pattern. And then finally, underneath that, you've got any requirements, also known as notions, and these are like your haberdashery. So how many buttons you need, whether you need a zip, how long that zip should be, whether you need any bias tape, etc, etc. So all of this information is really worth taking into consideration and very, very useful. But most importantly, what you really need to do prior to even looking at a pattern is take your own body measurements so you know exactly what you're looking for.